to Baking and Books, Christmas Cookies and Christmas Stories Edition, Day 6. I'm Heather Greer, and today we're going to do something just a little bit different. We're going to be talking about the book Ordinary Snowflakes by Jennifer Rodewald, but today instead of a cookie, we're going to make cake balls. It's a little bit different, not only because it's not a cookie, but also because I use a cheat. When I make my cake balls, I use a cake mix, generally Betty Crocker, as long as I can get the flavor I need. And what's good about this is you can use any flavor of cake mix that you want to use. You can use any brand, I just prefer that one. And you mix it up according to the directions. So I've got my cake mix in the bowl, and this is for spice cake mix. I'm going to pour in my 1.5 cups of water and my 3 eggs. And I'm going to mix it for 2 minutes on medium speed. Once I have my batter all mixed up, I'm going to put it into 2 round cake pans that I've already lightly greased. You don't have to worry about flour and all that to make sure it doesn't stick at all, because you're going to be breaking up the cakes anyway. The reason I use round cake pans is so that I can split it half and half. If I only need a dozen or 1.5 dozen cake balls, I'll just use 1 pan, and then I'll have the other one already full for just having a regular cake. Or I could even do 6 cupcake cups. But I usually use, like I said, 2 round ones. That way I can see how many I'm getting out of the one cake before I go to the other. I will let you know, used to, when I first started making these, 1 box of cake mix, and it didn't matter what flavor it was, would give me a good 3 dozen cake balls. I never had to worry about being short. If somebody ordered 3 dozen, I knew 1 cake mix would do it. But lately, I think they've lowered the amount in the cake mixes because I don't get quite as much. I can still usually get 3 dozen out of them, but I go ahead and buy a second box just in case if I know somebody ordered 3 dozen, because it's not unusual to get only 34 or 35 out of it anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and pour these evenly into the 2 pans and put them in the oven. And then we'll come back and we'll make the icing that we need to help form our cake balls. And then after we've got them all ready and start dipping them, that's when we'll talk about Ordinary Snowflakes by Jennifer Rodewald. While our cakes are in the oven, we're going to prep our icing. And for this, we're going to need 1 cup of Crisco, which you can buy in these little blocks, so you don't have to even measure it out, or you can just get the big tubs. It's cheaper to get the big tub and just measure it out yourself, but sometimes I like the convenience of just unwrapping it and putting it in the thing and not having to measure. You're also going to need 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And before we add anything else, I'm going to go ahead and mix these up a little bit. Now, don't have a heart attack when I do this next part. I need 1 pound of powdered sugar. This is a 2-pound bag, but what I'm making right now isn't totally specific, so I really just mark half the bag with my fingers and pour it in. If I find I need a little more, I add it later. And then while we have this here, you need to start adding some water as well. Generally, for this recipe, for the thickness I need, I will add 12 teaspoons. We're going to start with 6, and then as we do the next ones, we'll do it 1 or 2 at a time. What I've got right now is pretty thick, so I do want to add some more. We're going to add 3 more, and then that'll leave us 3 more to add if we need to. And I am going to add those last 3. What you have is enough to make 2 different batches of cake balls, so about 6 dozen cake balls. You may even have enough to do more than that. but I know for sure you will have enough to do 6 dozen cake balls with what this recipe makes. You can also cheat on this. You can go and you can get canned frosting. That's perfectly fine. Its texture is a little bit different. You want to stay away from the fluffy, stick with the creamy. But even then, the texture may be just a little bit different. So you may find you use a little less or a little more to get your cake balls the consistency that you want them. But for right now, while our cakes are in the oven and I have the frosting made, I'm going to cover it and put it in the fridge to wait for when we need it. We have our frosting made and we have our cakes made and cooled. And you do want to make sure they are completely cooled before you do this, because we're wanting to get a fine powder basically out of our cake. And if it's hot, it'll kind of mush together, which can create clumps once you add the frosting instead of making it a nice smooth texture. So I've already taken our spice cakes out of the pans and put them in the bowl. It doesn't matter if they break, we're going to break them up. Got my gloves on and I'm just going to start crunching them up. And I want to make sure that I get any edge pieces, any clumps. You want to make it as fine as you can. I think that's the problem sometimes with why people don't like cake balls. Well, a couple people I know don't like them because they're really sweet, and I can't do anything about that. But what I can help you with is the fact that sometimes people either put too little frosting in there and don't get it mixed up, so you have dry clumps and wet clumps and things like that, or they don't get it broken up well and they end up with clumps that are just frosting and clumps that are just cake. So we want to go ahead and get this done really fine. Okay, see how there are no really big clumps in there? It's all little. That's what you're going for. Once you have that done, you need 1 cup, more or less, of the frosting that we made. You're just going to put it right in there. Now, I have noticed that different flavors, you may need to use just a little more or a little less to keep your cake the texture you need, where when you're rolling it, it's not cracking apart and things like that. So once you have it in the bowl with your cake, you're just going to get in there with your hands and mix it up. I just kind of scoop it with my hands and then fold it over and keep doing that occasionally, cleaning off my hands where the icing gets stuck on them. And you're going to work it until it's a nice, almost like Play-Doh consistency. So just keep going until you get it the consistency that you want it. And I am going to show this to you so you can kind of see what it looks like. And now what we're going to do is roll it into the balls that we are going to dip. And so I've got a cake pan here. Unlike most days, instead of parchment paper, I have wax paper down. You can use parchment paper, but I prefer wax paper for this. And then you're going to want a cookie scoop. You don't have to use one. It makes it a little more uniform as far as size goes and as far as the shape goes. This one is right at a tablespoon. And I'm going to take them and just scoop. And what I like to do is scoop several and just drop them in my bowl. And then I come back and I roll them into a better shape after I get most of the dough already scooped. Once you have those scooped, or at least mostly scooped, you can go ahead and start shaping them. They will be almost a ball anyway because of using the cookie scoop, but I just roll it in my hands to get a little extra roundness to it, and then place it on my cookie tray. And right now you don't have to worry about spacing them apart. We're doing this as kind of a holding plate for the cake balls so they can be touching each other. While I shape these, I want to talk to you about Ordinary Snowflakes. I'll show you the cover between the rolling and the dipping portions, since I have gloves on and don't want to touch my electronics right now. Ordinary Snowflakes by Jennifer Rodewald is one of the Christmas books I read, I think, 2 Christmases ago. It may have been last year, but I'm really thinking it was the year before that. And I really enjoyed the book. I had read a few of Jennifer Rodewald's books that were a little more serious in nature, and I absolutely loved them. I was hoping this book wasn't quite as heavy as those, and I wasn't disappointed. It was a really good, lighthearted Christmas romance read. The main character of Ordinary Snowflakes is Kale. She's a single mom of a little girl with special needs due to an accident that she faced. And so, in addition to normal mom guilt, Kale has a little extra helping of guilt thrown in, and because of her daughter's accident and limitations, she also tends to be a little overprotective. This particular Christmas, 2 men come into her life. One of them is Craig. She experiences all the feelings of a crush and a growing romance. Craig is charismatic and handsome and just makes her feel like nobody has in a long time. The second guy on the scene is Joe. Now, she's known Joe for a little while longer because Joe has been next to her the entire time, working with her daughter as her physical therapist since the accident. Joe is kind of that solid, steady guy in her life that she can always count on for help. While Joe is a great friend, he doesn't make her go weak in the knees like Craig does. And sometimes, because of their relationship where he's friend and also physical therapist, he pushes Kale when she's not quite ready to be pushed. And so it can cause a little bit of friction in their friendship and their relationship. While Kale is busy trying to sort out how she really feels about these men and what part they should play in her life, you also have Sydney, her daughter, who adds an element of fun and childlike innocence and lightheartedness to this story. Even with all of the romance elements and the butterflies and the fun that the daughter, even with the romance element and all the butterflies and weak in the knee moments that Kale experiences and the fun, lighthearted times that her daughter Sydney brings to the story, there are still little snowballs of truth that we can take from this story and apply to our lives. One of the most important ones that I got from it was that we need to be concerned about the things that are important to the heart of God and not necessarily the things that the world tells us we should be checking off our lists. I think that's one we can all strive for more in our lives. I really enjoyed Ordinary Snowflakes by Jennifer Rodewald, and I think you would too. So check it out and add it to your to-be-read list this Christmas. Our cake balls are all shaped, so what I'm going to do is slide them into the refrigerator. Now, it's not necessary to put them in the refrigerator, but I like to do that while I'm melting the chocolate, and then we will come back and dip them. For the chocolate, I use a melting pot. It helps keep the temperature even as everything's melting, and it has a melt and a keep melted setting, a warm setting. And so that's what I use. You don't have to use that. You can melt your chips in the microwave. You can melt them on the stove. What you want to do though, especially if you do it in the microwave, keep a close eye on it. You don't want to put them in for over 30 seconds at a time and then stir. And at first it's going to seem kind of pointless because it's not going to really look like it's doing anything, but it is. And the other thing that you'll want to do, especially when you're dealing with the white chips are hard. They don't melt with the same consistency as chocolate chips, even with shortening added to them, which I always add shortening either to my chocolate chips or my white chips. They still don't seem to melt as smoothly. They tend to clump. If any moisture at all gets in it, it's going to clump up and make it hard to dip your cake balls and make them look nice. It's also very easy to burn them after the fact. So if you're using a melting pot, you do want to make sure that you turn it from melt down to warm because they will, along the bottom of your melting pot, start to get hard, and then again, you're not going to be able to use them for making your cake balls look nice. So I'm going to set this up. I'm just going to pour in the bag of chocolate chips and add a heaping tablespoon of shortening to begin with. And then as I start stirring them and see what kind of consistency it is, I may add some more shortening. Before we get into shaping our cake balls and getting them dipped, I want to show you the book that we're going over today, Ordinary Snowflakes by Jennifer Rodewald. Once you have your chocolate melted, and you will have to play with the consistency a little bit, once you start dipping a couple, you'll see if it's going to cover it well. If it covers it too thinly, you need to add some more chips. If it covers it too thick and you can't really get it to make that nice pretty covering on the cake balls, then you may want to add a little bit more shortening to it. But once it's ready to go, all you're going to do is take your spoon, place the cake ball in it, drop it in the melted chips, wipe off the excess from the bottom of the spoon, and carefully just let it drop onto a second prepared cake cookie sheet. So I told you before it didn't matter if they touched. Here it does matter if they touch because the chocolate will harden together. So you do want to have another cookie sheet available. Again, with just wax paper on it so that you can drop them on there. And you don't have to worry about little extra bits of chocolate that sticks out from the sides when you drop it down. Sometimes you can drop it just perfectly. Other times you get just a little bit of extra. That can come off after you have let them cool. Once everything has hardened, then you can go back and use a knife and trim off those edges. Another thing that you can do, because right now they're just white balls, kind of like snowballs, but if you want to dress them up, you can. While the chocolate is still wet, you can add sprinkles or colored sugar to them. You can go out and, I mean, you can get like blue and white and snowflakes, or if you want more traditional Christmas, there's all sorts of things like this. You don't have to get big ones. There are little containers that just have one type in them. Those are fine too. And you can sprinkle those on there while the cake ball covering is still wet. Another thing you can use to decorate them is royal icing, which is what you would use to decorate cookies with, because it hardens a little bit and you wouldn't want something soft like what you have on a cake on the cake ball. So what you would do with that royal icing, one year at Christmas I had an order for about 10 dozen cake balls, and they were all supposed to be decorated differently. Some of the white dipped ones, I used icing to make little Frosty the Snowman faces on them. On others, I used green and red and made holly berries and holly leaves. So you can get creative. You could do a bow and make them look like little presents. If you do any icing work at all, those are some quick, easy ideas to just kind of dress them up a little bit, make them a little more festive. Sometimes a side without much of the coating is showing. And so instead of having like a little bald spot on your cake ball, while the coating is still wet, you can scoop just a little bit and kind of drizzle it down the part that's missing the coating, and that helps kind of correct it. Once you have your tray full, go ahead and slide it in the refrigerator to harden that coating. You can leave it out to do it, but it will take it longer. So I always put it in the fridge. I don't go with the freezer because sometimes that freezing and unfreezing can crack your chocolate coating. Here is our finished product. Cake Balls and Ordinary Snowflakes by Jennifer Rodewald. Merry baking and happy reading.